Hey guys, Loman02. I kind of want to cover a task I've been putting off for a while. This is going to be a Canadian Highlander video. This is going to be about Storm. So this is Storm with no demonic tutors. So there's a points change that a lot of the there's a point change that really kind of changed a lot of the combo decks. A lot of them were homogenized around Black Lotus and demonic tutor point spread. When demonic tutor was 3 points. So Black Lotus is still a 7-point card in the format. DT is now 4 points. I think a lot of folks who still play the Storm variety decks tend to go with Black Lotus still in the spread because it just your power hands are gonna always have access to it or have it, and then Gifts Ungiven and Mana Vault. You could also put in like an Imp Seal over a Mana Vault if you were so inclined. But I do think the mana is just more relevant, and it kind of in some ways, not in all, but in a very few ways, Mana Vault acts as an alternate Black Lotus for certain lines, and certain play tendencies the deck can tend to have. That tends to tie into like the two big tutors, Behold the Beyond and Diabolic Revelation, where you just need pretty much one shot off of one or the other to win the game. These are the big commander-looking tutors that you kind of see played in these style of decks in Canadian Highlander. They see play absolutely nowhere else, probably except for Commander. Like that's why I call them Commander tutors, because they're just... The first time I saw the build of this deck that had Black Lotus, Demonic Tutor, I was like, why are these cards being played? Behold the Beyond and Diabolic Revelation. Well, the reason is, in the older versions of the deck, if you could cast one or the other to tutor for 3 cards, you just won the game. Depending on if there's been any cards exiled out of your deck or your graveyard. But if you cast Behold the Beyond, you discard your hand, obviously. Find Black Lotus, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Demonic Tutor, or for this deck's case, without Demonic Tutor, Infernal Tutor, and you just win the game. So that's why these 2 cards are in here. Because, sometimes there are lines where, you don't have access to the 3 cards I specified, and you just want to find all 3 and just win the game on the spot. So let's jump back a little bit before we do that. So what you have in front of you is Storm. This is Canadian Highlander. If you watch my channel pretty regularly, you probably know what the format is. If you don't, go ahead and Google it. I'm not going to fully explain the format. It's a Highlander format with a point system, vintage, van legal. So why play Storm? Well, if you enjoy, more technical play, that is still fairly linear for the most part, although Storm does have some edges to it. It's got some disruption in it. You have to know how to mulligan it to get to the right disruption per matchup, etc. I'll talk through a bit of that when I go through the disruption pile that I have put in here inside this deck tech. But for the most part, like once you get the generalized lines that are inside Storm, it's not too bad to play. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to play. It's pretty straightforward. Once you understand the general lines. I think the refinement process really comes into how do you play around disruption, because this deck does beat a hell of a lot of disruption, which is it beats Blood Moons, it beats, Thalias, can beat quite a few cards that you would think normally would just like stifle the ability of a Storm deck to actually go off, especially without a sideboard, because you don't have that. So one of the biggest reasons I was putting this deck tech off is what I want to get more reps with the deck. I just want to get a ton of reps in with the deck, and by this point I have 2. There was a points change, and I kind of intended on doing it, and the deck, I think needed to be revisited. But and I really wanted to make sure I did the deck justice, because the deck design, like this deck theory that was put into building this deck, is certainly not my own. This was refined up in Canada, more than likely by Robin Sorensen and Ben Wheeler. I would guess the 2 probably both had a hand in designing the older Demonic Tutor, Black Lotus varieties of the deck, and it's maybe even older than that. I don't know. But the biggest thing is, like, a lot of folks see Storm, they see Storm played, they play against it, and I think oftentimes there's like this mystique that like Storm is hard to play, and it's not the easiest deck to play. It can be very punishing if you make mistakes, which I've made plenty of playing it. But I do think there is some credence to understanding how it works, because a lot of times when I play this deck, I do tend to get some wins where I probably shouldn't, just because folks don't fully understand like how it works, and from how it works, like how do you disrupt this deck. And I don't think it's the powerhouse it once was with Black Lotus DT, but it's still no slouch. It won last year's year-end event with Robin Sorensen piloting it, and obviously very talented pilot too. But the deck is very powerful, right? So, if you do pilot it well, and it's one of the more powerful decks or top-tier decks, like it should do well. Okay, so let's jump into how this deck is broken down. Well, Storm is only a 30 land deck, which you have over on the far left here. It is a deck that has 51 committed slots to its mana, and its mana alone. And then it has a lot of tutors that are also trying to find mana. So despite being a less landed deck, I mean, there are some decks that have less lands, like, some varieties of red deck wins run less, like Sui Black Flying Men run far less, like 24 lands. There's even crazier varieties of combo decks like Belcher that run like 7 to 9. But this deck actually is a fairly mana-heavy deck. Over half the deck is committed to the mana. So you have two piles that denote the mana. You have this pile over here, which is just basically your 1-for-1 mana. So I play one land, I get 1 mana out of it. Then you have your pile over here, which are your mana filtration effects or your ramp, your acceleration. Let's call it acceleration. It's not ramp. Your acceleration and mana. So the deck has just a ton of mana. Typically speaking, I think some folks, there's like some misconceptions about like Blood Moon being great against your Magus of the Moon, and like it's fine, but it honestly doesn't do that much. Because realistically, like what you need to get this deck, you have a lot of red acceleration. You have a lot of red-based acceleration, which might as well, honestly, for the most part, be colorless in the deck. It doesn't really matter what color it is. It's just it makes a bunch of mana for less mana in a card. But really, you only need one startup mana of 1 black mana. So if you have 1 black mana, typically speaking, you can combo with this deck. If you need the right sequence of cards, but I mean, if you have a Rain of Filth, Dark Ritual, you name it, Cabal Ritual, you can normally get it going. Plus you're a Black Lotus Alliance at Diamond deck, and they don't care about Blood Moon. On the same token, like cards like Collector Roof, well, they can have an impact in what combo line you opt to take. This deck's not an all-artifact mana deck either, so it's not like it's Eggs or even some varieties of Academy where you can just like shut off their win cons or shut off their mana entirely. So the mana base is fairly diversified and also very robust and quite resilient in my experience with playing the deck. You're also playing a basic swamp, I believe a snow basic swamp and a basic swamp. I think that's what I've got in this build right now. I may only be on the 1 swamp. No, I have 2. That makes sense. I should have 2. So you do have some basics in the deck as well. I mean, folks are going to play Assassin's Trophy, even Path to Exile. This is not a creatureless deck. There's actually some relevant creatures in it, and they're ones that, go figure, actually do something involving mana. So you have Goblin Electromancer, you have Baral in this deck. Basically, creature cards that either, like Blood Pet and Wild Canter. Basically cards that make it easier to produce the mana that you need when you need it. And they also accelerate you. Like Blood Pet, a turn after it's been cast, is acceleration at that point. And then you've got stuff like Dimir Infiltrator, which is technically a creature, but is really a tutor. I don't think I've ever cast it as a 1/3. Maybe you do in some. Maybe you have to in certain spots, but I feel like if you can cast this thing, you want to transmute it so you can try to win the game because it finds tutors. And or mana, can find Cabal or Ritual. And then you have Trinket Mage, which just finds Black Lotus for Lion's Eye Diamond, or Sensei's Divoting Top. It's another relevant one. Alright, so, you start looking at the deck. The deck is a ton of mana, very robust mana base, as I was talking about. And how is the deck kind of glued together? Well, this is Tutor Storm. It's a tutor variety, ritual Tutor Storm variety. Like if you look at like vintage historically, I don't know if ritual-based Storm is any good right now. I would assume probably not. Maybe it's better with Mental Misstep restricted. But typically speaking, like when you look at like vintage in the last couple years, and I don't even know if it's technically still going on now, but Paradoxical Outcome was pretty much the go-to. I mean, you have access to more artifact mana than you do in Canadian Highlander, or more good artifact mana than you do in Canadian Highlander, and Paradoxical Outcome is kind of the best way to, have an Ancestral Recall that can also be a Dark Ritual Plus, or, more than an Ancestral Recall, more than a Dark Ritual Plus, all stapled into one card. Because you're making mana and drawing cards. It's kind of a self-looking ice cream cone, and probably, honestly, an easier deck to play than the Ritual-based Storm. But I think, typically speaking, when you're looking at those style of decks, I mean, all of them are probably a little easier to play than when you're playing in Singleton, because they have more prosaic lines. They're more homogenous, more prosaic lines. They're just more clear, making them more consistent decks. That said, this is ritual-based and tutor-based Storm. So the closest analogous deck in, actual Magic is Ritual Storm in Vintage. It does borrow from a lot of the other Storm decks that have seen play in other formats. So, to some extent, I've got cards like Goblin Electromancer in here. Manamorphos that see play in modern Storm varieties. And then you also have LED and Infernal Tutor, which see play in Legacy Storm. So you're kind of pulling from all those decks to actually get to the card density you need to play at 100 card count. But what really holds the deck together? Well, it's the tutors. This is a massive pile of cards I'm highlighting right now of tutors. And I already talked two of the big ones right here. The ones that kind of folks first look at and say, I did. I was like, what the hell is this doing in here? These cards just look bad. And they kind of are. Like Diabolic Revelation and Behold the Beyond are kind of bad. But when you're making this much mana and by resolving one or the other, you just win, they're definitely worth it. If you resolve them for 3 at a minimum, you'll pretty much win any game if you have the cards you need to win in your deck still. So these are some of your power cards. Typically speaking, the hands you'll keep with these are going to have a large amount of mana acceleration, so that you can do them, by turn 3, turn 4. As far as consistency goes on the deck is a consistent turn 4 deck in fishing. I'd say 3.5 to 4. It does have, turn 1 draws too. I mean, if you draw Black Lotus, LED plus Infernal Tutor, you just won the game. If you have that in your opening hand. That said, I mean, the deck is really held together by these tutors. Typically speaking, your typical game, is going to be, play a land, play some mana acceleration, and or like a Sensei's Divoting Top or some disruption or card draw. Turn 2 tutor, turn 3 tutor, turn 4 win is your typical plays. And I'll go through the actual winning combinations or how the deck wins with literal tendrils or how it kind of generally goes about it. But covering the tutors, you have these two chunky big ones up here. Then you have Beseech the Queen, which, if you're not familiar with this card, it's also kind of a weirdo card. It's played Commander. I don't think anywhere else that I've seen, at least recently. But yeah, 3 black or, 2 generic and or black. It's a hybrid mana cost. You can search a library for a card with converted mana cost equal to or less than the number of lands that you have in play. And you can do a lot with this. It's variable what you find with it. Sometimes it's Yawgmoth's Will or Ill-Gotten Gains. Oftentimes it's going to be Black Lotus. Your first tutor you cast generally is finding more mana, but that's not always the case. But you really, for this deck to tick, you want access to Black Lotus. It's nice to have Black Lotus and LED. You can do it without Black Lotus. You can definitely just do it with LED if you have enough mana to cast an Infernal Tutor after you crack LED to find the next piece to the chain. But Beseech, just a rather expensive but necessary tutor just due to availability of tutors. Dark Petition, this is a demonic tutor, essentially. If it resolves and you have Spell Mastery, which oftentimes you will in this deck because it runs a ton of spells, it's going to make that ritual effect afterwards. Oftentimes the problem with a card like Dark Petition is that your mana filtration is not going to be great for it, or you may want 1 blue, 1 red. You're always going to need the most black mana in this deck. That is the most essential color. Because oftentimes to go through the winning line or winning sequence, you need at least 6 colored pips of black mana to go through the full thing. I think it's 2 for Tendrils, 1 for... it could be... If you need to go through the full loop, or the full sequence, it's 2 for Tendrils, 1 for Yawgmoth's Will, 2 for Infernal Tutor, plus 2 for Ill-Gotten Gains, plus 1 more for Infernal Tutor. So you're looking at 8. I mean, but you're finding Black Lotus as an LED. So once you get it started off of 1, you can generally do it. But the issue is normally the startup. So Dark Petition doesn't tend to be the first tutor you want to cast. Again, this deck's trying to kill by turn 4, so you're not generally casting this card just straight up on turn 5. If you are, something probably went wrong. Although, if you're not dead and you're casting on turn 5, you probably have a bunch of cards in your yard, and you're probably getting the black mana back and can still win. But typically speaking, this is going to be your third or fourth tutor after you've gotten a bunch of black mana available, so that you can have access to your land still after you've casted if you need colored mana. Alright, Gifts Ungiven. So Gifts Ungiven is kind of the replacement for Demonic Tutor. It's the pointed card that is gone. It's a 2-point card. Gifts Ungiven allows you to find 4 cards out of your deck after targeting your opponent, and your opponent chooses which 2 you get to keep and which 2 go into your graveyard. In a deck like this, the piles are really honestly not that straightforward. There's not always going to be set piles that you want to do. It's really going to be dependent. That said, one of the cards that I'm running in this deck right now that I think is probably sort of training wheels, it's probably not necessary because when I play with gifts I've never really needed it, is Noxious Revival. This card is really not great in the deck. It's only really in here because I have Gifts Ungiven, and if I really need specific cards, Noxious Revival makes it much tougher for them to give me, or for them not to give me some card that I need, or that is going to win me the game. But if you resolve gifts, generally, so gifts tends to be an EOT on your opponent's turn card in like the Time Vault decks. In this deck, you can generally main phase gifts and still win, just because of the volume of card selection and mana that it gives you. Just having access to 2 of 4, having the second and third best cards in your deck will tend to win you the game, especially if you have access to the first and second best in your graveyard at that point in time. So I'm not going to go through gifts piles because there's just really not any like standard gifts piles. They just vary so much when you're casting this card. Grim Tutor, just another tutor, kind of again a commander card. It doesn't see play elsewhere. It's very expensive at 3 mana. Does 3, or you lose 3 life from it. But giving you any card, putting it directly in your hand is great. Ristic Tutor, this card is again poopy, but 3 mana tutor. If opponents don't tend to play around this, it really depends on how experienced your opponent. My opponents have not tended to play around this. I think it probably depends a little bit on how experienced they are playing against the deck. And honestly, you shouldn't always play around it. Like if you're not pressuring a Storm pilot, like you should cast your threats. If you don't have something active to do, like you don't want to just sit around and wait against this deck because it does kind of like a glass cannon. It has a ton of disruption, and trying to counter its spells is honestly pretty hard because you have a bunch of discard. You have Defense Grid, you have Orm's Chance, Silence, Abeyance, like really cheap ways to like stop interaction. You'll find a lot of the interaction in this deck is designed specifically to stop interaction. But when it comes to Ristic Tutor, like if you're not pressuring someone, like tap out to apply pressure. But if you're opting, don't opt not to play pressure to play around Ristic Tutor. So I guess what I'm saying. But a lot of folks just don't play around it. Period. Like they'll play nonsense out that doesn't do anything the turn they play it, and they'll just lose. Which you don't want to do that. You kind of want to avoid that. Like if they're playing on a mana rock or something, you're just like, all right, great, and then you just kill them. All right, Trinket Mage. Trinket Mage is pretty specifically in here to find Black Lotus, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Sensei's Divining Top. Those are the primary targets for it. Black Lotus and Sensei's Divining Top tend to be the most operative. LED is a great second Black Lotus, so if you already have access to Black Lotus, get the LED. I tend to find LED and Black Lotus the most, but I think the most relevant targets are Lotus and Sensei's Divining Top because they just have different functions. If you just need startup mana, you're going to generally get the Lotus to get the chain going, and if you have gotten blown out in some way, shape, or form, but you still have access to a decent amount of mana, you get Sensei's Divining Top so you can find some sort of tutor so you can win the game. But yeah. All right, Fabricate. Yep, this card has actually gotten more interesting. So this also finds Black Lotus, LED, and a vast plethora of different things. I found Defense Grid with it before to just force someone to counter some stuff and then eventually beat them. But one of the cool things it finds is it finds any card in your deck because you can now find, you can now find Wishclaw Talisman, which is pretty cool. So it basically can tutor for a tutor that finds anything in your deck. Wishclaw Talisman, I'll jump to that card in a second, but you're only using this once. This is a one-time thing. It's basically like a Grim Tutor that you can't recycle with Yawgmoth's Will. You don't expect to recycle this with Yawgmoth's Will. LDV, Limdul's Vault. This card's sick. Cool old card. So if you're not familiar with Limdul's Vault, you basically index as many times as you want to, and when I say index, I mean look at the top 5 cards, put them back in any order. You don't draw a card off this. It's card disadvantage. And you can do that. You can basically take those 5 cards, put them on the bottom. I believe you reshuffle at that point. You put them on the bottom, and you can look at the next 5 cards. If you do that, you take 1 life loss from doing that. And when you complete, taking as much life loss as you want to stack your deck, then you take those 5 cards, separate them, shuffle your deck up, and put those 5 cards on top. Let me make sure I got it right. Yeah, you shuffle your library up afterwards. So if you're at 20 life, you can see your whole deck. And put Black Lotus on the top of your deck, or put a tutor on top of your deck, or whatever you need to. With the density of tutors in this deck, like unless I'm specifically looking for mana, this thing doesn't tend to do a lot of life loss or a lot of damage to me when I play it. If I'm looking specifically for fast mana, like Black Lotus or LED, then I'll take 3, 4, 5 off of it. Trying to find that, or trying to find something that's cheap enough to make sense for me to kill on the following turn. This does tend to be an EOT play, unless you have a card draw effect and a lot of mana. You can do it main phase as well, but it tends to be very mana intensive. When you start seeing blue and black, like double pip symbols, you don't tend to want to be casting the turn you're trying to go off because your mana is going to be fairly focused on making black mana at that point in time. Dimir Infiltrator, just a tutor for a tutor. This is not in here for its creature qualities, although a 1/3 for 2 that can't be blocked is interesting and cool. Probably good in like a ninjutsu deck. Not being used for that here, so it's being used to find tutors and or to find Cabal Ritual. The most common things that these Transmute cards tend to find are Infernal Tutor or Cabal Ritual, either mana or a tutor. And Cabal Ritual and Infernal Tutor tend to be like the two best. I've found other tutors off of it, like when DT was a card you could play in this deck, you'd find DT with this over Infernal. But Infernal's probably the best right now. You can find Tainted Pact too, but like Tainted Pact tends to be in a weird spot in this deck. You generally use Tainted Pact. So Tainted Pact's odd, right? Like you can use it to actually find your win con. Like if it's the tutor you've got, like you'll just find tendrils with it and win, 'cause it doesn't matter how many cards you exile if you're gonna win. But oftentimes you just have a general idea of what sort of card you want with Tainted Pact. Like I want mana, I want another tutor. It's not often going to be the tutor that finds you specifically Ill-Gotten Gains or Yawgmoth's Will. And the reason you don't want to just go like ham on it and try to find like Infernal Tutor, for instance, or find like specifically Black Lotus, if that's what you need, is because you have some components that tend to be fairly essential to actually comboing off. Specifically Yawgmoth's Will, Ill-Gotten Gains. Like you don't want to lose both of these. You can lose one, but you can't really lose the other. If you lose both, it tends to be hard mode to actually storm off, because the deck itself, while it does have some card selection and some card draw, doesn't have vast card draw. It's intending to use the graveyard as a resource. So yeah, like you don't want to just cast your Tainted Pact and then like exile essential components to being able to actually win with a combo. So typically it's basically intent driven. Like I want mana, I want selection. Like it's one or the other. Like, and Tainted Pact does get used to just find lands sometimes in this deck too. If I keep like not a greedy one, because I mean this deck inherently looks greedy, but it's pretty consistent. But if I only keep a 2-lander or like a 1-lander with maybe like a 1-lander and I have like a Petal or something like that, or what's that bad card called? Actually, I'm not running anymore. Jeweled Amulet should still be in here. You know what? We're gonna fix that. Let's fix this deck right now. I'm gonna stop the deck tech and we're gonna fix this. Jeweled Amulet should be in here. I don't know what I was thinking. So Jeweled Amulet in. Like, you know what? I'm gonna fix this issue. Noxious Revival doesn't be played in this deck. Just put a Jeweled Amulet in. It's better. I mean, it's not a lot better, but it's better. So where was I going? I lost my train of thought. I was like, yeah, why is Jeweled Amulet not in here? It should be. So yeah, I mean, when you're looking at Tainted Pact, like you're using it for basically intent-driven guidance. Like you're like, all right, I want mana, I want selection, one or the other. You're oftentimes not like going for like your Yawgmoth's Will, because if you hit Tendrils, like what do you do then? You're like, all right, well, I have to put this Tendrils in my hand, and Tendrils is actively the shittiest card to have in your hand. That it is. It's just, you don't want Tendrils in your hand. Like Tendrils in the opening hand, like that's a blank card. You really don't want Tendrils until you want to win. You don't mind having it in your deck. That's probably the safest place for it to be. Yeah. So, all right. Moving up. Shred Memory finds Infernal Tutor or Tainted Pact, Wishclaw Talisman. You name it. Just tutors for quite a bit. Muddle the Mixture, same thing, another transmuter, just transmutes into a bunch of those cards. Sometimes Defense Grid, too, I've gotten that. Teleria West, yes, is a land. Sometimes you do play it as a land. It's very rare you do. Oftentimes I try to save this, because it's not a very good land in this deck. I mean, this deck does use blue mana for, like, cantrips, but really it's, a tapped land that's blue is not good. But this finds Black Lotus and it finds LED, which tends to be very, very good. Having access to those cards is good. Gamble. So Gamble is an interesting one as well. If you open on this card, like you'll tend to cast it turn 1, because honestly, like you're gonna try to find Lotus, and if you find Lotus and bin it, like it's all right. You have better access to it within your bin, and if you get to keep it in your hand, then you have a Black Lotus in your hand, and your chances of winning have gone up tremendously. So Gamble's not like quite at its full potential like it would be in like a Loam style deck, where like you just can't gamble wrong. Like you just gamble for Loam, or Savine's Wreck deck, where even if you top deck Gamble, you're just like, all right, cast this, get Savine's Wreck in my graveyard, bring back 2 nonsenses. It can have a fail rate in this deck, but it's a fail rate that's definitely worth it. Like you just if you ditch something you wanted, like kind of stinks, but you're a Yawgmoth's Will Ill-Gotten Gains deck, like who cares? Like you'll get there. So yeah, this is the tutor pile. This 18 pile here are the tutors. And I guess you could probably extend that over to some fetch lands, but that's not really quite the same, is it? Okay, so this next pile here is the disruption. You have Orm's Chance, Silence, and Abeyance. Talking to like Ben Wheeler and some of like the Victoria pilots, they're not as high on Abeyance. I don't know. I could see like cutting Abeyance and like putting in like Fire Ice again. Like Fire Ice is kind of a cool old card that you can run in this to like deal with Thalias, to deal with Eidolon of the Great Revels, stuff like that. But I don't think Abeyance is horrible. Like it's not the worst. Typically speaking, you're using like cards like this to bide time against. So you're using these cards to bide time against active decks, like decks that are not very. Or, I'm sorry, the active decks, like proactive decks that are not very reactive to what you're going to be doing on their turn. Like on their upkeep, you'll cast this so they don't throw a bunch of burn spells at you or cast a bunch of dummies. And then against the reactive decks, you're using this on your turn that you want to go off to basically force them to spend a 2 to 3 mana, maybe even 4 mana if you're lucky, counter spell to counter your Orm's Chant or your Silence, which, typically speaking, they're going to exchange up in mana with the control variety decks that are in the format. So, yeah, they tend to be very problematic. They're basically like counter spells for counter spells is how you need to look at them. But they do have some flexibility too, because you could even use them against active decks that are going to be having relevant board impact to try to set up killing you. And if you force them to take a turn off and with Abeyance, draw a card, then that tends to be pretty decent. All right, Collective Brutality. Yeah, this card's just really good. Like this card's almost played in every black deck, and I don't think that's wrong. This card's just very flexible in what it can do. In a wide variety of matchups. Good against control, good against aggressive decks that have like Thalias or like Dryad, Militants, etc. Just kind of does it all and can rando gain you life. If you really need the life, you don't often need the life in this deck though. Your life total in this deck is one. Like you play this deck like kind of like you've probably heard some old school like control players like your life total doesn't matter until you're dead. This deck doesn't care about its life total. It's like, all right, if I'm still alive and I can still cast spells, who cares? But yeah, I mean, I guess in some cases you could get bolted out if you're going too hard. But typically speaking, it's better to go hard and try to win quickly with it against the deck that's going to be trying to cast lightning bolt in your face than it is to sit around and try to gain life against that deck and waste card resources. Pyrite Spellbomb, yeah, this can again deal with problematic creature permanents that have bad effects for you. One of the downsides to both Collective Brutality and Pyrite Spellbomb is that they do not stop Campbell. Campbell, I think it's Campbell. The 2/3 legend is Azorius casting Vindicate mana cost, black-white 1. 2/3, whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life, which, this kind of kills this deck. Pyrite Spellbomb, Collective Brutality can't deal with that card. Aether Spellbomb's kind of in here as an ode to that guy because that guy does tend to wreck. You also have Chain of Vapor for the same reason. Like, there's just going to be some permanents that, like, you just can't beat, and you just want to get rid of. So you'll EOT this thing and just get rid of their permanent. Now that said, like, when you start looking at the spell bombs, like, if they're bad in the matchup you're in, if their actual effect is bad in the matchup you're in, they just cycle too. So I mean, like, you put one in play on turn 1 and then maybe cycle it EOT on their end step if they're like on like a mono green stompy deck or some random stuff. You just get rid of them because they don't have cards that really interact with yours. So who cares? Like, you don't need it. Defense grid, yep, control decks. Discard, typically speaking, control decks. Chain of Vapor against anything that's going to have a problematic permanent. One cool thing with Chain of Vapor that kind of does keep it relevant in, for the deck's operation at level 1 is that, like, I have had games, it's very rare, but I have had games where, like, filtering a blue mana into different colors of mana was kind of relevant. Like, I just needed to literally, like, Prismatic Sphere, not Prismatic Sphere, I can't think of it now. There's a really old card where you pay a bunch of mana to filter mana into another color. It's bad. Typically that effect is bad, like Painted Canyons or whatever, that effect. But I have Chain of Vapor, like my own Pented Prism, to... Actually, that example would make sense. I've Chain of Vapor for capacity, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Like, it's generally not mana... it's mana volume and not mana color. So, like, Grim Monolith and Mana Vault, you can actually net mana having that or doing that with. And the reason that can be relevant is if you're trying to cast one of these big donkey tutors right here, because they're very expensive, and if you net 2 mana off of an exchange, like, it tends to be pretty decent. you can have to do it. It's not decent, but it's something you can do if you have to do it. Then Silence Worms Chant, again, like kind of counter spells for counter spells. They're like, more versatile Pyroblast, I guess, if you will, because they do have some relevance in matchups that are not interactive in the most standard way. Like they're good against, they're decent against like red deck wins, for instance. Like you can just cast this and buy an attack step off of them, so you can get another draw step or whatever. So anyways, that's kind of the disruption the deck has. You can decrease it or increase it depending on how you want the deck to play. And there are certainly more cards that are available that can make this deck specifically, more proactively enabled. But I think in general, this is a pretty healthy amount of interaction for the deck because, again, it is fairly narrow. It does have a fairly narrow margin of how it wins. Now, when it wins, it looks spectacular and it just wins overwhelming and fast. But when it's really not those games that you need to worry about winning once you understand how the deck works. It's really the games where that's not going to work that you need to be able to win, or like they have problematic permanents that you can't just beat them with tendrils on, or they have an Ivory Mask or whatever, and you need to find your Chain of Vapor to actually kill the Ivory Mask. Not that an opponent's going to have Ivory Mask. I mean, True Believer's probably more believable. Like, even that probably won't see play. But I think you can understand what I mean. Like, or like an Ashiok. Like, I have seen Ashiok in play. It didn't make any sense. That card is really bad, but I was like, all right, well, I can't beat this Ashiok. So I had a Chain of Vapor at EOT, and then, like, and I say Ashiok, the new one, the one that doesn't allow you to search your library and that like exiles your graveyard every turn. It does everything you don't want to see on a card, even though it's utterly terrible. It's just not a very good card, but but it's very good against this deck. So I mean, I have had that play against me and just need to have a Chain of Vapor to get it. And there's gonna be stuff like that where like in certain matchups you're like, I just need a Chain of Vapor. I just need to bounce this thing and then give me a turn. I can win on that turn. So I do think that this amount of disruption is very essential. Next pile is just mana. So I'm going to briefly go over this. These are probably cards you've seen, but these are cards that are very necessary because this deck wants to go quick. It wants to go quick, and in order to do that, you've got to play some card disadvantage mana producers. So Seething Song, I believe now banned. Actually, it's been banned in Modern for a while. Pentad Prism. This is mana filtration. It's mana neutral the turn you cast it. So if you need to generate more mana of a specific color, and your mana pool is not able to do it, but it's able to generate able to generate colored resources that you don't have access to, you can convert it into mana you may need. You can also cast it on turn 2, and then by the next turn on turn 3, you have access to a ton of mana. Jet Medallion, again, I was kind of saying black mana is the most essential in this deck. Your most expensive cards are black. Your two big tutors are, you have Dark Petition, which will only be actually technically a 1 mana tutor at that point. Jet Medallion's pretty good. I do like running it. You could run Helm of Awakening in this deck, but that is a unilateral effect. That makes all spells cost a generic mana less, but it's for both players. You could run it in here. I wouldn't think it was crazy. It's very fast, but I mean, it obviously assumes a bit of risk because your opposition at that point in time has access to casting more spells due to having reduced mana cost on them. Grim Monolith, just 2 mana for 3. Pretty good rate. It's not quite Mana Vault, but it's still good. Manamorphose. Yeah, card's very good. I mean, it just filters and draws. So, I mean, it does cantrip, but it also just gives you the right mana. And it's kind of one of those cards, just like, it's free to include because it just filters itself out. It just, it makes the same amount of mana it requires to cast, and it draws another card. So, I mean, it's basically a free cantrip. It's basically a Gitaxian Probe that, can fix you. But it requires more startup mana, obviously. It's definitely no Gitaxian Probe, don't get me wrong. It has startup requirements. Squandered Resources, this is an old combo goodie. This is basically kind of like a slightly better in some ways, but probably less good in this deck variety of Reign of Filth. You don't tend to play this and win the same turn, I have found. But it could be my play patterns on it or how I play the deck. Typically speaking, I cast this thing and just sit on it, and the next turn I win with it. It's not generally going to be fast enough the turn I cast it. What this card does, though, is you sack a land, and you can make basically one color of any color that land can produce. So, basically each of your lands, sack them. Basically, your lands all make 2. They make 2 mana of whatever color they can make. So yeah, and then you lose them, but this deck's looking for one big turn, so the acceleration is really big. Goblin Ultramancer, 2/2. One of the funny things about these creatures, so this is a spell cost reducer, which the deck's looking to do because it's casting a lot of spells really fast and it wants to cast a bunch of them on one turn, so it can storm off with Tendrils of Agony. One of the cool things about the creatures, though, it's not obvious about just what's written on them, is if you get in 2 to 4 damage with your creatures, which oftentimes folks won't respect your attack step, it tends to actually kind of almost be a little irrelevant because you don't need to storm for as much then, and you can actually do what would typically be lower EV lines because you've gotten in 4 to 6 points of damage with Goblin Electromancers and Brawls. So it's one thing to note. Increments of 2 are important when you're playing against this deck, especially when you're fetching. They do come up. Now, when the deck goes through its standard line, you're just dead. It doesn't matter. Unless you're at 50 to 60 life, you're probably dead. I mean, maybe not 60. I haven't actually gone through the math for how much this deck can do in one turn with just the optimal hand. But it's more than 40. It's definitely more than 40. But anyways, definitely keep an eye on it. I mean, you don't want to open yourself up to just taking incremental damage from this deck because in a lot of ways it's playing around Scape Shift in Modern. If you take two, it's significantly different by generally a turn cycle because for that deck it's 7 to 8 for the difference between 18 and 21 damage. So yeah. Pyretic Ritual, yep, just red mana, just make colorless mana basically. It might as well say colorless on it. The red doesn't really often come up, other than when you chain red rituals. Chaining red rituals tends to be nice because they make mana that cast the next ritual. Desperate Ritual, same card, except for I splice on the Arcane. You can technically splice this in this deck because I believe I am running Peer Through Depths. This card is debatable too, though, so you could technically splice it. I have never done that. It's never come up for me. Cabal Ritual, one of the best mana producers in the deck. Because this deck is made up of a ton of mana cards and a ton of spells, your graveyard's going to get thick really fast. Getting Threshold on this is huge, especially if you have a cost reducer like Baral or Goblin Electromancer or Jet Medallion, and this thing costs 1 mana. 1 mana for 5 is just astronomically huge. That's why it's one of the mana cards that I find I most often tutor for that is not Black Lotus or LED. The best mana producers in the deck or accelerators in the deck are LED and Black Lotus, hands down. There are not better. There may not be better in the game. No, there's probably not. I mean, Soul Ring is debatable, but that's for a different effect. There's not better in the game for doing what this deck's doing. But Cabal Ritual does kind of make a good third on it, and I think this is probably the third best mana card in the deck for how the play patterns often play out. You could say Mana Vault maybe too, because it's very cheap for how much you get, but black mana is very essential in this deck. Baral, just in here to filter your draw. I actually have gotten one trigger off of this by casting a Muddle the Mixture on a spell, which is it's pretty funny. Won't lie, but yeah, he's really in here just to. And actually, the 1/3 body is kind of relevant too. It's actually a better body than Goblin Electromancer, not for damaging opponents, but it's actually a good blocker. This thing just randomly blocks a bunch of stuff that is played in the format. Mana Vault, my last pointed card, so I'm on Black Lotus is 7, Gifts and Given 2, and then Mana Vault. This is just another ritual, is really all it is. It's a ritual that's slightly worse than a ritual. Rituals you'd rather have because they go to the graveyard, and things going to the graveyard tend to be really good in Yawgmoth's Will, and Ill-Gotten Gains decks. But this is just a lot of acceleration and works really well with our big tutors right here to win the games that we have those in. Wild Canter and Blood Pet. These cards kind of look bizarre, but they're actually randomly really good. You play them on turn 1, and by turn 2 you have 3 mana, which is great. And secondly, they work really well with cards like Yawgmoth's Will. Getting these back is just free. It's free spells basically. If you're playing them and sacking them immediately, it's a free spell. You burned up a card to make the same amount of mana you had before, which is good. And if you just play them and sit on them for a turn, then you have an extra mana on the following turn. All right, Mox Diamond, again, 30 lands, doesn't seem like a ton, but it's a significant bit for this deck because you're running so much other mana. And oftentimes, I've just cast this to throw it in the graveyard, so I got 2 Stormcon off of it, and I've also used it quite a bit to actually fix my mana off of the lands I had. It also gives you a little more range against Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, Back to Basics, stuff like that. It's going to attack your mana base. So yeah, card's quite good. Lotus Petal, yep, just again, like if you're playing against Blood Moon decks, it's also just fast. I mean, it's an extra mana on the turn you play it, which is again pretty good. Lion's Eye Diamond and Black Lotus. Honestly, in this deck, when you have the optimal hands, there's not a ton of difference between these two cards because of how the deck's play patterns work out and how you tutor with it. And specifically with Infernal Tutor. If you're a Legacy Storm player, you play with Infernal Tutor. You put an Infernal Tutor on the stack, discard your hand if you have junk lands in there, and then you have the LED mana in the pool, find the card you need, and you go to town. And in that deck, I believe it's a Past in Flames deck because Yawgmoth's Will is not legal. But typically you're finding ill-gotten gains to up Storm count into Lion's Eye Diamond plus Infernal Tutor into Yawgmoth's Will to do it all again, and then just win with Tendrils off of the last cast of Infernal Tutor. So oftentimes they play very similarly, but it's no Black Lotus. I mean, they're close. They're very, very close in this deck. But not, it's just a smidge below it. Curl Mox, again, you get to hands where you're going to eventually have some irrelevant stuff. Like Orm's Chant may just be utter junk, and you just need a colorless mana. You may not need Collective Brutality because the disruption is just not there in the deck they're playing. You just don't need to do it. But having a free spell that also can accelerate you, just obviously good. Same thing with Jeweled Amulet. I was looking at the deck and I was like, why do I not have Jeweled Amulet here? This card looks like dog shit. And it kind of is, but this is also probably a card that only sees play in Commander. It's an Ice Age card. It's like the fixed Moxen from Ice Age. It's very fixed. It's bad. But it's not horrible. So what you use this card for is you play it on turn 1 and then just put a mana into it, EOT, or if you don't have to cast a cantrip, just put a mana into it, and then you're up to 3 by turn 2. It is decent mana acceleration, and this deck's only looking to have one big turn. You're not looking to get habitual value or use out of your cards. You're looking to expend them to win games of Magic. So, card is just fine, even though it's probably going to see play in almost no other deck. Black Lotus, yeah, this is a 7-pointer. This deck is really made, I think, possible by this card. Funny enough, before I started playing Canadian Highlander, I played 100 card Singleton, which is now a dead format on MTGO. I played German Highlander, where there's no power. And I have built Storm decks that did not have access to Black Lotus in them, and and I've won games with them, but they were real hard. They tended to be hybrid Storm decks that used High Tide and Bubbling Muck and stuff like that. And they worked, but they were generally I don't know. I think with one of them I went 4-1, which it felt good to even go 4-1 with it because it was just not good. But Black Lotus really is the glue that holds the set together. Having access to this card makes the deck, in my opinion, I won't say viable, but the most competitive versions of it that you can play are going to include Black Lotus. I do have other versions that do not run it intentionally just to build and see what I could do with them, but they're not quite as good. They don't have the consistency or the speed this deck has. All right, and then the two big ones, the ones that kind of involve most of the lines, that the play patterns and lines that you're going to have in this deck. That's Ill-Gotten Gains and Yawgmoth's Will. So I've been talking about all these tutors over here and how they're either going to find you more tutors or they're going to find you mana. Eventually, once you have the right density of tutors in the graveyard and mana available, you're going to use your last tutor to find Ill-Gotten Gains or Yawgmoth's Will, depending on storm count typically. If you're low on storm count, you'll find Ill-Gotten Gains. You can replay the fast mana and the tutor, one of the tutors, maybe 2 of them, from your graveyard to then go find Yawgmoth's Will, which will up your storm count by, at a minimum at that point, 4. And you should be either mana neutral or mana positive. You'll generally be mana positive if you have access to the LED or the Black Lotus. And then when you cast the Yawgmoth's Will, your storm count is going to be +4 at that point due to the what I call the Iggy loop, but it's just an Iggy maneuver. You just use Ill-Gotten Gains or Iggy to up your storm count by 4. One of the other cool things with Ill-Gotten Gains or Iggy is that it does get back Yawgmoth's Will. So if you open on a hand with Yawgmoth's Will, which is not a bad card to have in your opener, and you get Thought Seized or Duressed, you'll use Ill-Gotten Gains to actually reacquire the card later in the game, because the best lines, the easiest, the fastest, the most consistent lines, the highest EV lines, are going to involve a Yawgmoth's Will turn. Do you need it? No. Most of the games that I have won with this deck have been with eventually an Ill-Gotten Gains or a Yawgmoth's Will loop. Not loop, but just play. The other way you can win is by using these big chaining these big tutors together. So you use a Behold the Beyond to find Black Lotus. Cabal Ritual and Diabolic Revelation. They use Diabolic Revelation to find more mana plus spells into Tendrils. So the deck can win out of the deck itself. It can just win without the graveyard at all, or it can, but it's very unlikely. It's very difficult to do that. And that's why you need the disruption, because if they get a Scavenging Ooze down or a Deathrite Shaman and they can get a vital component of your combo, you need to deal with it, because you're going to be using your yard, generally speaking, in most games to win. All right, so the last pile I have over here is just card selection. Just rapidly go over this. You have Git Probe, Brainstorm, Opt, Peek. I'm not going to talk all these because they're pretty common cards, or they just replace themselves, or give you a couple looks and allow you to find a card. Ponder, Preordain, Serum Visions, Sleight of Hand, Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting, actually, I will moat something on. Faithless Looting is actually interesting in this deck. Because sometimes I actually like casting this 4-card disadvantage to get rid of lands out of my hand so I can cast an Infernal Tutor. Oftentimes the hold up on Infernal Tutor is going to be either you don't have access to LED immediately, or you're trying to cast out of a hand that has too many lands in it, which can happen on 30. So you want to get rid of 2 or 3 of them and then just dump your hand and play Infernal Tutor to win. Since he's Divoting Top, yep, it can cantrip. It's also just card selection, anticipate. This is again what do they call it? It's a Penny Dreadful or a commander card. It's fine. It does its job. Impulse, yep, just goes 4 deep. Peer Through Depths. This card is possibly dubious. It cannot find lands is the biggest issue with it, but it finds spells, which this deck is consistent of to a large extent. Shimmer Possibility. Not convinced that Peer Through Depths and Shimmer Possibility couldn't be Strategic Planning and Ransack the Lab. Those are both very good cards, and one of the positive things with them is they put cards in the graveyard. The other side of it is Shimmer and Peer just go much deeper. Not much deeper, but they go a card deeper. 2 cards deeper or 1 card deeper. Dependent. And I put a little value in selection. I like selection. So right now I'm playing these 2, but you could play Ransack the Lab and Strategic Planning, and they'd be good too. Worldly Council is a 5-color deck, so getting Worldly Council for 4 to 5 is just fine. It's basically another copy of Impulse to find the right cards. Diabolic Vision, Old Ice Age card here. Look at the top 5. Put it back in any order and put 1 in your hand. So, card's pretty good. It's sorcery speed. Cool, weird old art. But a very powerful effect. It's just kind of slow. It's normally just a setup card to find what you need. And just a bad index. I guess index by nature is bad, but, it's got that index kind of feel to it. The mana base is pretty much straight 4-color. It's bias blue-black, black-blue, let's say, because it's mostly a black deck. And that's kind of the build. So, before I jump into some gameplay with this deck, this is a slightly longer deck tech, but I'm going to talk some of the typical Storm lines. Basically the most simple ones, right? So, there's really 2 ways you go about it. I'm going to talk the real easy one, and then the one that most typically you'll find you go through. So the easiest Storm line involves these 2 cards right here. And then this card right here, and this card right here, and then whatever other mana you got. I mean, it doesn't even need to involve these initially, but actually typically the best ways you do this, it doesn't involve these right away. But you cast a Behold the Beyond, and you find Black Lotus, or Diabolic Rev for 3. Find Black Lotus, Lion's Eye Diamond, Infernal Tutor. Play out the Black Lotus, play out the Lion's Eye Diamond, sack the Black Lotus, and do it in that order too. Don't play Lion's Eye Diamond first, because if someone blows your Lion's Eye Diamond up in response to you casting Black Lotus, then you're out 3 mana, because you don't want to discard your Infernal Tutor, because then you just lose the game. So always play Lotus before LED if you're doing an Infernal Tutor sequence. So you cast the Behold, you find these 3 cards, play out your Black Lotus, play out your Lion's Eye Diamond, sack your Black Lotus to make black mana, put Infernal Tutor on the stack, sack Lion's Eye Diamond to make generally black mana. At that point, you're going to find ill-gotten gains. So we're at Storm count, at a minimum 1 off of Behold the Beyond, but you probably didn't go one land into, you probably didn't go land for 7 turns. So you probably cast 2 to 3 ramp spells or acceleration spells to get Behold the Beyond down. So let's be modest and say 2. That's very modest. Let's say you cast 2 spells before Behold the Beyond to get into it. And then you cast Behold the Beyond. That's 3. So you use Behold the Beyond to find Black Lotus LED and Infernal Tutor. So you are at 6 at that point, because you're going to cast all these. You're going to use Infernal Tutor to find ill-gotten gains. So at Storm Count 6, you cast ill-gotten gains. Look up to Storm Count 7, you get back Black Lotus, Lion's Eye Diamond, Infernal Tutor. Cast Black Lotus again first. At Lion's Eye Diamond, sack Lotus, make black mana, cast Infernal Tutor, sacking Lion's Eye Diamond with Infernal Tutor on the stack. At this point, you are at 11 Storm Count. You can then find Yawgmoth's Will. Find Yawgmoth's Will and Rinse, Wash, Repeat. And, if you cast a couple spells to get Behold the Beyond deployed, you're going to have more than enough mana, and you can cast some irrelevant cards that just make mana for no reason, because you don't need more mana at this point. But use Infernal Tutor at that point off the Yawgmoth's Will to go and find Tendrils of Agony and cast it for lethal. So I think with that line, you can kind of see that the Storm Count is more than enough. You need Storm Count 10, Technically, you need 9, because you have the copy itself at 20 life if they haven't gained any life. But you can make it for a large amount of life lost at that point by casting it with this method. It's probably the easiest one to go through. The rest of the lines really all circulate around getting access. So these kind of bypass a lot of the incremental tutoring that you need to do. But the typical lines tend to involve, for me at least, finding these cards right here. You can do it without this card. This card tends to be one of the best at it because it works really well with Lion's Eye Diamond. But you don't need to have it. Any other tutor will do. Any other tutor that puts a card directly in your hand will do. That's one of the reasons why I think, that when I looked at the build, I like Mana Vault better than Imperial Seal. Putting cards on top of your deck is a lot different than putting them into your hand, obviously. And when you're trying to look to win all in one turn by casting a bunch of spells, having to wait another turn is just pretty god-awful. The other lines will really all circulate around finding these 3 cards, though, in order to find these cards right here. Ill-gotten gains doesn't always need to be in the loop. If you have enough Storm Count, you can find Yawgmoth's Will directly. Sometimes you'll be a little mana choked on your startup mana, so you'll have to get Yawgmoth's Will because you're not able to produce the 4 you need for ill-gotten gains to gain mana on the backswing from it. But basically every line you go into is going to circulate around finding Lion's Eye Diamond, finding Black Lotus. Generally, it's going to involve Infernal Tutor, but it can involve any tutor, and then using ill-gotten gains to get back this mana plus another tutor, to then find Yawgmoth's Will, to get back this mana, and a tutor to find Tendrils. That's really all it is. It's actually quite simple when you play it enough. It's a deck that I think requires you to practice a significant bit with it to become accustomed to the most standard lines, so you can win when you're supposed to win. And then from there, what I think really comes down to is understanding different matchups and when it's intelligent, safe, to go for it. And then what interaction you really need, basically how you need to mulligan your hands with this deck in order to beat different matchups. What disruption do you need to beat them? Because it varies by matchup. Against Death and Taxes, I think you're a little bit unless you have a turn 1 win. I think maybe a turn 2 win. I think you're a little crazy, and a turn 2 win on the play. I think you're a little crazy not to have some interaction in your hands against them, because they're going to typically mulligan as well, and they're going to mulligan to cards that try to hose you, like their Thalias, like their Dryad Militants, etc. They're going to try to do that, so you're going to want to have ways to interact with that sort of stuff, whether it's a Collective Brutality, a Pyrite Spellbomb, an Aether Spellbomb, a Chain of Vapor, maybe it's just a Silence to buy a turn because you can go off by turn 3. But they're gonna generally tend to do that, so you should as well. And understanding how you do that is, I think, is a little bit of an art. And I'm not going to go into a not sideboarding plan, but a mulliganing plan per matchup. I'll leave that up to you as a viewer. But what I am going to do now is, I'm going to stop this deck tech portion of this video. And I'm going to jump into a little bit of gameplay with Storm, because I do think the deck's quite fun to play. It's generally pretty interesting. It does have some prosaic, some banal kind of lines. You get to see some of the lines that I was talking about here with Yawgmoth's Will and Ill-Gotten Gains. But it also does have some interesting play as well. So let me go ahead and cut it, guys. I'm going to find a couple matches, and we'll get some gameplay down for this deck. All right, guys, we're back. This is a game 1 against player Weix. This hand is greedy. It's a bit on the greedy side, but it's acceptable. I don't mind keeping this hand because I have a top, and I'm on the play. I can use top of my next turn to find mana sources. The deck is primarily mana. It's a little land light, but I feel like finding my second land's not that going to be that hard. And I have this Blood Pet when I want to go off. And I have access to Behold the Beyond plus Heuristic Tutor. So I have 2 tutors. I'm just a little mana shy. I'm a little startup mana shy, but I also have Gamble. So if I find a red mana source, I can find a Lotus right away. So I go ahead and top look here. I find a land, but it's a bad one. It's Tundra. I would have rather had a red source here. I'm going to look on their EOT here to try to find that mana source. So they go ahead and cast out a, I believe a 4 mana, this thing, Hedron Archive. They're on like a big Eldrazi ramp deck, try to just like kill me with a big monster. So I'm going to look at EOT here and see if I can find a card that is not Baral and Tendrils, which are currently on top of my deck, ideally a red mana source. I do not get so lucky, but I find a Silence, and I'm like, okay, well this is a free redraw, so I'll draw the Silence here and play that on their turn. And then go ahead and so I had an option here. I could have actually not cast the Blood Pet out and looked with top to see if I could find a red source that was third from the bottom post draw there. I don't actually like doing that because if I find it, it's really good. But if I don't, then I don't really set up my next turn all that well. And if they tap out for like some big dummy here, I could possibly if they cast like Sneak Attack or something like that, I could die to it. So I figure it's probably best just to get the Blood Pet down and actually up my mana count for the following turn, and have access to Heuristic Tutor to find Black Lotus. And or if I do find the red mana, then I can use the red mana as a startup for Desperate Ritual into Heuristic Tutor into Black Lotus, and then possibly cast this Behold the Beyond the following turn. I'm sorry, not one Desperate Ritual there. I'd Heuristic Tutor to find Lotus, and then the following turn cast the Behold the Beyond. So we're just trying to set up. This hand's not panning out exceedingly well, but it's also not terrible. Like, it could win next turn based on what I'm able to find with top. They unfortunately have Through the Breach, and I'm like, I'm going to lose the game. So I sack this thing to find my land, see if I can find my land. If I found a red-black mana source, I would play this game out. I find 3 just bullshits on top. 2 of them I knew were bullshits, so it's not like it's very unlucky. But I'm going to lose all my permanents here. I can flip top to like draw one of these bad cards, but I really don't want to draw top next turn either, so I'm probably just going to let top die. Since I know I'm drawing 3 garbage cards over the next couple of turns, it doesn't really make sense to play it out here. If I had another draw step and was able to find that red-black source like I was talking about, I'd go all in on a gamble, try to find a Black Lotus and win the game. But just can't do it. This Ulamog, during the upkeep with Through the Breach is just pretty savage, and they just get me outright. So that's pretty cool, though. I can't complain about it. I'm playing a pretty degenerate deck myself, and I wouldn't say their deck's that degenerate. Getting Through the Breach just feels like fair game to me. I'm pretty happy when I see that. I'm like, all right, well, so sometimes Silence doesn't stop it, and Silence definitely did not stop it here. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for Game 2 against WeX on RG. I'll call it. I won't even call it Monsters. RG Eldrazi. All right, guys, we're back. So yeah, this hand's much better than the first one. Still has top, but it has 2 tutors that are reasonably costed. And it has decent mana production. They suspend a Search for Tomorrow, find another land, which is fine. I'm just gonna go ahead and get this Jet Medallion down. It'll give me the option to Tainted Pact next turn, possibly win next turn. They play out they get a land here with the Nature's Lore. They're going to have access to 4 up to 5 mana next turn if they have another land drop in hand, because this Search for Tomorrow is going to come off. What I have to do here is, I could try to dump my hand on this turn to get Infernal Tutor off and try to win, but the chances that I fizzle are pretty high, because I'm going to have to Tainted Pact, for a very specific card, which in this case would be Black Lotus or Lion's Eye Diamond. And if I hit Tendrils of Agony or Yawgmoth's Will, then I have to take those cards. So I think the chances of me hitting one of those cards and fizzling is just it's high enough. The risk of passing the turn back to them is worth it, because I get to Impulse plus Tainted Pact here on their EOT and just set up this Infernal Tutor better. You could go for it there, but there's a chance you just don't. It doesn't work out. I find the Mana Vault because I want mana at this point. I go ahead and Tainted Pact here. I find the Black Lotus, and I'm like, oh, okay, Black Lotus is good. It's a good Magic card, and I just won the game. This is a game win, so I cast all this fast mana out. Cast out a Brawl just to up the storm count. I really don't need it though. Mana Morphos, looking for a land drop. Find my land drop. Cast the Infernal Tutor out. Get Ill-Gotten Gains. Storm count 6. Find Black Lotus, Tainted Pact, and Infernal Tutor. And yeah. The other cool thing about Ill-Gotten Gains is it mucks their hand up too, to some extent. They are low on cards, but I just find this Tutor on top. Find Rain of Filth to make more mana. This Tainted Pact to find Rain of Filth. So I'm on Rain of Filth right now, and I can find Yawgmoth's Will to up the storm count to like upwards of like 20 at this point, because I have Rain of Filth still active, so I can generate 4 black mana off of my lands right now. And then, if I wanted to, I mean, realistically, I can just find Tendrils and just win right here too. They don't have any instant speed ways of gaining life or finding a land drop to go to 21 here. So Storm count 11 is more than enough to kill them. So you can find Tendrils here and just win. And/or, if you really wanted to have fun and have style points, like you could actually find another Tutor and Tutor for Yawgmoth's Will at this point if you really wanted to up the Storm count. But there's no need to do all that. I was just going to find Tendrils and win the game on the spot. But they go ahead and concede it because they know that I've got them here. And yeah, turn 4 kill. Like I said, I mean, it's kind of as advertised. Like, it's a pretty habitual and consistent turn 4 deck. It'll get you on. Anyways, guys, quick pause. Be back momentarily for the next game. Alrighty, we're back, guys. So this hand's pretty good. The one thing this hand is lacking that is actually going to plague me throughout this game is an actual Tutor. And I think I make a misplay in this game, too. There's one play I don't like that I did. But my thinking is this. Like, I've got an Opt. I've got, this Faithless Looting. Like, I have a lot of mana. I feel pretty confident that, like, especially on the draw, like, I'm going to have a lot of shots at finding the right Tutor to make this hand work. Especially with a Black Lotus Facsimile that is the Lion's Eye Diamond. So if I find Preordain, I'm like, all right, cool. Cool. I see a land and Orim's Chant. I just take the land, put the Orim's Chant on the bottom, I think. No, I think I kept the Orim's Chant here. They play out a Gruul Signet. I did keep the Orim's Chant. That may have been bad. Maybe I was like, yeah, Orim's Chant may have been bad here, guys. No, I don't think it was horrible, because I don't have the Tutor yet. Like, it kind of makes sense to buy a turn at some point, I think. So they're going to cast a 4-drop here. Because their deck can do some powerful things. I mean, like, they're already at, like a bazillion mana. They can cast a 10-drop Eldrazi next turn. So I don't think it's horrible. I go ahead and Faithless Looting here, trying to find a Tutor. So this is the misplay turn. Like, I don't think the Orim's Chant was per se wrong. I don't think that was totally wrong. I may have gotten rid of it. I don't know. That one I'm not sure on. That one's more of a value, a judgment-based decision, I think. But, like, the play I don't like here is I Faithless Looting, and I keep the land drop as opposed to keeping the Sensei's Divining Top. I think it's more correct to keep the Sensei's Divining Top. My thinking is I'm going to Orim's Chant them next turn so they don't cast something that blows up my lands, because I do want my mana here. But I could have kept the Sensei's Divining Top as opposed to opting on their EOT. I think my thinking is, like, now that I have all this mana, like, all I need is one more card. Like, I can actually flashback Faithless Looting and still win if I find a Tutor, because I'm going to have access to Black Lotus as well off of this Trinket Mage. I think getting rid of Sensei's Divining Top, though, was wrong. So I think just having that flexibility to see 3 cards deeper could have been relevant. So I Orim's Chant them here so they don't cast something. They luckily don't have Through the Breach again, so I don't just die. And if they did that here, I would just die. Jet Medallion I put on the bottom. I don't want mana at this point. I draw 2 more lands, so I'm like, oh, this is not looking good. I find another land plus a Pyrite Spellbomb. So not going well. I think, again, like, I think Sensei's Divining Top was correct to keep there. Because, I mean, if you start looking at these cards I've drawn, like, if I had access to Sensei's Divining Top over the land, I mean, results-based, it would have been better. But I also think the deck runs enough lands that I probably should have had faith in it. Or it runs enough mana sources that I should have had faith in it to provide me more mana. I just kept the card selection. That's on me. A cycle here. All right, now I have the win. Like, so I don't get the turn 4 kill, but I find the turn 5 here. Dimir Infiltrator is going to be a win because it's a Tutor for a Tutor. So I play out my Black Lotus, my Lion's Eye Diamond. Go ahead and transmute the Dimir Infiltrator to find Infernal Tutor, sack LED with the transmute trigger on the stack. Find Ill-Gotten Gains to get back LED, Infernal Tutor, and Black Lotus, and go to Tau. So yeah, this is find. I don't know if I find Bargain here. Or I'm sorry, Will. Cast the Black Lotus, like, just go through it and just get them. So it's kind of a very similar play pattern to the first game, or the second game. The first game I just died in. And it's pretty habitual that, like, I tend to try to go for, if I'm playing this deck specifically, I think these tend to be the cleanest lines. Generally tend to involve Infernal Tutor. Like, Infernal Tutor is kind of, in my mind, the replacement card for Demonic Tutor. You don't need it. but it tends to make the cleanest lines possible in the deck. So due to the fact that you have multiple Transmute cards that are costed at CMC2, like if you're going to find something with them, like it's either going to be mana, which is Cabal Ritual, or it's going to be Infernal Tutor, because Infernal Tutor is just the best at its job in the deck, in my opinion. So yeah, we ended up getting this one against RG Eldrazi. I don't think it's an exceedingly challenging matchup for Storm. I don't think I played this last game exceedingly well. I think I definitely should have kept that Sensei's Dividing Top. And there's debate on whether or not I should have just bottomed the Orm's Chant as well. I think I was maybe a little timorous about, maybe it's a control player in me. I was like, well, I don't have an assured tutor, so buying myself a turn at the right time is like basically a free draw anyways. Actually, I think it's still right, because it's kind of a free draw anyways, because their deck doesn't play at instant speed typically. It has like one card that does. We got hammered by it in game one. But they don't play at instant speed, so like taking a turn from them that way is really just an extra spell in your graveyard, as opposed to in your deck if you have to fetch again. Because you don't really want to draw Orm's Chant against this deck. But it's also an extra spell count if you're like, you're casting Yawgmoth's Will and you just need spell count for Storm. So I still think that was actually a defensible and intelligent. I think that was the right play, actually, thinking about it more in depth now. The Sensei's Dividing Top play was wrong. That was just dead wrong. I think I should have got rid of the land and just kept the top. The top can find me land on the following turn if I just fail to find it. Yeah, so I didn't like that part of my play, and honestly, it may have set up a turn for a win better than it did than we had here, because as it turned out, we were only one card away from from finding the card we needed to actually win, which was Dimir Infiltrator, was kind of that draw. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily with more gameplay with Storm. All right, guys, back playing against Munwolf. Munwolf is an academy player, typically. This hand's perfectly acceptable. It's got a cantrip to find whatever we may need, which is probably just going to be more mana at this point. This hand's great, though. You've got a ton of mana. Realistically, we just need to get more cards in the graveyard to fuel up Threshold on Cabal Ritual to make 5 off of it. And that's got Infernal Tutor. It does not want to draw more lands, because lands, again, can tend to be awkward with Infernal Tutor, unless you can get rid of them, because you can't just throw them in the trash. When you run hot, you run hot. I want to say, do I have an out to killing next turn? I think I go slow this game. Yeah, I just duress them here. I probably could have gone for a win. Let me look at it. I don't have to, but I probably could have. I'm just drawing stone nuts here. Like, my poor opponent is definitely dead here. This is going to be a turn 3 kill. I don't quite remember everything in this game, but it's turn 3 kill almost assuredly. Start sacking lands to get to 7 so I can get Cabal Ritual off. That's just a disgusting draw. I probably could have turned 2 there. I don't know. I have to go back and relook at it. It would have been a lot tighter. It wasn't necessary to do so, because at the time I knew their deck, and I'm like, they're not going to kill me on turn 2 probably. Yawgmoth's Will, yeah. You can see I don't do the Iggy loop here because my Storm count's just so asinine that I have a fairly clear and easy win here. So again, Infernal Tutor, fairly big go-to for me. And yeah, I mean, Storm's also a deck that definitely rewards you for top decking well, which I did there. I opened on a very good hand and then top deck well, so I mean, it just it snowballed. I think there was even turn 2 potential in that hand, but I'd have to go back and look at it. I think the issue with it was I was gonna have a card trap that I just didn't get to cast, which would have been that Desperate Ritual, and I would not have gotten Threshold mana off of the Cabal Ritual. Which would have limited the upward storm count of the hand if I had gone for it. But I have to relook at it. It may have been exactly at storm count. The turn 3 was just, or the turn 3 here was honestly just it had way over storm count. It was one of those hands where I think I was stuck at 6 to 7 storm count trying to go for a turn 2 kill, and I was at a bazillion storm count by turn 3 just because I had that one extra mana to cast that ritual initially to have the startup mana for all of it. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2 against Munwolf here. Alright, guys, we're back. So, this hand's bad. I kind of felt so, I'm going to be honest. I felt a little guilty after that first game, so I was like, Jesus, I'm a luck sack. I kept this hand, and I'm not trying to, I don't know, how do I put it, not sound like an asshole. I kept this hand because, this hand can win. This hand's not horrendous. It's got a silence, which can be kind of good against them, especially if they have cards that need to be chained together in sequences. But it's got Faithless Looting, so it's going to get rid of some of these dog shit lands. And it's also got an Impulse. It's just a little bit slower. But I think this hand's still okay. I would probably mulligan this in tournament, but You know, I was like, I just got lucky. I have a game to throw. I'll try this hand out. I think it was kind of part of it. And I just felt bad, I think, a little bit. All right, find Infernal Tutor. So I'm like, all right. We just need mana. We need to find mana production at this point. But this hand's actually pretty good. It's gotten better, you know, I guess is what it is. It's still like only has half the solution in it right now. So I think what I'm going to probably do here is fetch and either Worldly Council or Impulse. It'll be the same thing after I fetch. Opponent plays out a Basalt Monolith, then a Sisay's Ring, then a Defense Grid. Defense Grid's a little bit annoying because I kind of would prefer to cast like these sort of cards on the EOT. I find utter dog crap with the Impulse. It's like Inquisition plus a bunch of lands, and or like a Chain of Vapor or something. I go ahead and attack their hand here, get rid of the Frantic Search, and see pretty much the scariest card I could possibly see. I see Mindslaver, so I'm like, oh no. Mindslaver's bad for this deck. If you resolve a Mindslaver against this deck, you just won the game. Pretty much. Like, it's almost impossible for me to win. I have so many cards that just, like, are not... If you cast them poorly, they kill you. Like, if you play Storm poorly, like, the deck will just beat you. And if your opponent's the one playing it for you, they're going to play it as poorly as they possibly can. So, I find a Trinket Mage here. Let me relook at this. Oh, I'm sorry. I cast a Silence to get a free draw. This makes 100% sense. So I actually like this line. I was like, why did I cast the Trinket Mage here to find Black Lotus? I could have tried to win last turn, but I opt to just go for this line. Now, one thing I'm curious to see, I know what I do here. I go for the high upside, like, play here, which is to cast Gamble to find something. I don't even remember what it is. Yeah, just Black Lotus. So I go for the 1 and 4 there. It doesn't pay off. If I'd gotten to keep the Infernal Tutor, I just win the game on the spot there. Actually, do I? Is that true? That's probably not true. So, my opponent does not, for some miraculous reason, off of this Tolarian Academy that they found with the Dig Through Time, kill me with Mindslaver here. They just start casting stuff. I think. What do they do here? Well, the game is broken. But I'll tell you what happens. Oh, they do cast a Mindslaver here. So they cast a Mindslaver, and they do take my turn. I don't get lucky. I don't get that lucky. So they cast a Mindslaver to take my turn. So EOT, I just pop my Lotus because, like, it's, you know, I don't want it. It doesn't need to be in play. I don't want it to be in place for them to do more bad stuff to me. And I use my Sensei's Dividing Top in hopes that, like, I have 3, like, that I can basically hide any card that will kill me. Because, like, right now they can't just kill me with Mindslaver. And if I'm real lucky, like, there'll be 3 really shitty cards on top of my deck. And then, like, I use Sensei's Dividing Top on the following turn. Like, there'll be 3 shitty cards that don't tutor in my deck. So if they can tutor, they'll kill me. Like, they can find, like, Tainted Pact, mill my whole deck. They can find Limb Duelist Vault and just, you know, kill me with it. You know, just keep cycling my deck and just doing one life loss to me. If they find any sort of tutor effect, they can also pop the top, put it back on top, draw a card, and then tutor to get rid of my top, which will put me in a bad spot. But basically, my hope is that, like, I won't have 3 bad cards on top of my deck. The replay's broken, so I'm not going to continue on this replay. But essentially, what happens is I look on the top of my deck and I have a Grim Tutor, and I'm like, I'm fucking dead, and I am. So that they find it. I don't think they actually kill me, even though they could have with it. They actually just find. They find, God, I can't think right now, Rain of Filth. They find Rain of Filth, just sack all my lands, and I'm like, alright, good game. And I'm dead. They could have found LDV, though. Limb Duelist Vault was probably the proper find, and then just, like, kill me with it. Like, actually literally win. But, I mean, like, it's good enough. I'm like, I'm good enough. They got an Academy in play, they got a Future Sight, they got a bazillion mana. I can't win. And so, we lose this one in a pretty decided fashion against Mindslaver, which is pretty sick. Like, losing to Mindslaver, I can't be mad about that. It's cool. Like, it's a cool way to kill a Storm pilot. It's very good against Storm. If you can do it. You know, if you can't, like, it's just a clunker. But, you know, when you get it off against Storm, like, that's an auto kill. It's probably a more assured kill than casting, like, you know, Blightsteel Colossus with Lightning Greaves on it against this deck. Like, I'd rather have to block and then win the next turn. Like, actually, if that had been the case, I would have won. You know, because I did have the Grim Tutor on top, which would have probably set me up to win and have a Black Lotus around all that. Anyways, guys, pause. Be back momentarily for the next game in this match. Alright, guys. Oh, this is the same game. I will repause and be back momentarily. Alright guys, now we're back. So, Storm action. That hand was junk. I'm actually mulliganing properly. This is a good hand. It has a lot of potential. It's land light, but we have 30 lands. We got a lot of mana in the deck. I'm just going to get this Wild Canter down. I think I want more flexibility in my mana. I actually miss here, which sucks. I just go ahead and play out the Mana Vault here. They're not likely to have a lot of ways to kill my artifacts. They don't do anything, and I'm like, well, I'm probably going to win if they're not doing anything on their next turn. Pardon me. Since I know Aristic Tutors in my hand, I opt just to go for it here because I don't want it to become dead. They go and get a Basalt Monolith out after copy artifacting my Black Lotus. But I have my Black Lotus out, and I feel pretty good about it. The problem with this hand right now is, like, I can't actually... If I had one more source of black mana, I could go all the way with this hand. I'm basically just looking to draw any land here. Like, any land is probably a game win. Just miss again, so I'm passing it back. I'm getting a little unlucky here, but I mean, I did keep a one-lander. I do think it was a very justifiable keep, but it's definitely not getting paid off here. All right, now I find my land. I'm like, all right, easy money. Like, got it. So I end up casting out the Baral here, make a bunch of red mana. I believe just cast Yawgmoth's Will, redo all of this nonsense. They make the statement that they could have played around this by leaving up mana. They couldn't have. Like, the Shred Memory was still going to get them here if they had tried to do that, because I can convert Shred Memory into Infernal Tutor, which is going to do essentially the same thing. The issue at that point would have been Mana Filtration, right? Yeah, it may have been an issue. I have to go back and look at it. But yeah, they're tapped down, so it doesn't matter. I can use that Ristic Tutor just to find the tendrils and get the game win. There's a turn 6 kill, which is not anything to write home about. I think it was a justifiable keep, and frankly, it would have been a turn 4 if I just hit my land. If I hit my one land that I needed, I was like, all right, one land, and I'm good to go. I just really needed that one land for startup mana because the hand had the explosive capability after that startup mana to really get going. It's also possible that, like, I should not have been as aggressive as I was with the Ristic Tutor, but my thinking was I'm on the play, and if they're not playing lands, like, I'm just going to throw the Ristic Tutor out there when they're not, because by the time they have 2 lands, like, they're going to try to stop me. It would make sense for them to try to stop me at that point, because I didn't really have much else going on. I didn't have another tutor. That said, I mean, like, you do need to be proactive as well. You need to kill me, like, if I'm playing Storm, because I'll eventually find a way to kill you. So, I don't know. Maybe they wouldn't have played around it. Maybe it was too aggressive to tap the Mana Vault that early. But again, like, the problem with the hand really wasn't, like, mana capacity, because, I mean, I had a bunch of red mana as well. But like I said, red mana is essentially colorless. It was really more so, like, the black mana that I needed to kind of keep going. But yeah, managed to get there. This is an Xaxi Storm. It's not. They're at 16, so they've taken damage off their own cards. I can only assume they could Taxian Probe and probably something else. I don't know what else they took damage off of. What else did they take? Oh, probably Beatdown? Was it Beatdown from Wild Canter? Fetch plus Beatdown? I don't recall. But anyways, they're at 16 already, so this is over lethal. But it would have been like a clear kill. And this is one of those ones where, like, you know, we basically just barely skid. And I think if they get another turn, like, they're going to win the game. But, you know, we hit our mana source and it managed to get there. And that was kind of like one of the things that the hand was kind of banking on, is hitting one of those lands, which is still, you know, even being a 30 land deck, you know, still the highest probability draw. So, managed to get there. Let me take a look for another game, guys, and see if I have any more that are about. And we'll try to do one more. I may not have one, and if I don't, I'll come back and maybe do some closing comments on the deck, and then we'll go ahead and call it there. Alright, guys, we're back. We're playing against Neeson here. Neeson 2112. This hand's acceptable. So this hand is lacking colored resources outside of black mana, which is not a horrible place to be because this deck is primarily a black deck. It also has a Dark Ritual in it and a Beseech the Queens. It's got Tutor, it's got mana. The mana is just not perfect. It's also going to top. Deathrite Shaman is Bad News Bears. That card is really bad for us. They cast a Doomfall and Wasteland me. So, this is actually one of those interesting games where, like, we got very heavily disrupted in the first turn. You know, and we're significantly down on resources now. So we got Wastelanded off of our Ebon Stronghold, which stinks. We had a Doomfall get cast at instant speed off of a Dark Ritual. that took away our tutor. So now we have no tutor and we're low on mana. So we're not in the best of spots. We need blue mana very, very much so. Because we can't cast all these spells that will ostensibly find a tutor for us. So this is actually kind of a cool game. Like the first couple games I had there, like were really kind of just pod racing matches. So you kind of got to see the deck fish. This is one where like I'm getting pretty hammered here. Like I'm not in a good spot. This is the real like first part where I'm going to try to get out of this, try to wrangle out of this. I find my land. So like, if I had not found a land there, I'm probably losing this game. But I find my land, and I'm going to be able to convert this opt into, some hopefully something better than what's on top of my deck. I get rid of the Cantor here because I have to. The Pachuca Bug is kind of an interesting one to. I guess they have to pitch it here. They could play it and just get rid of the 2 cards in there. I think you want to just play it to get rid of the 2 cards in there. I go ahead and get out the Pyrite Spellbomb, blow up their Deathrite Shaman. They exile the Manamorphose, lose their DRS, which is really big. Like that DRS needed to go because it's going to be able to get essential components out of my graveyard that I'm going to end up needing. Like I was saying, I'm going to need 1 tutor in order to win. Generally in my graveyard, if they can kill that tutor in response to me, like Ill-Gotten Gainsing it or Yawgmoth's Willing it, it's very problematic. I go ahead and flip top here because I'm planning on. I don't want to discard any of these cards in my hand. I would prefer to discard something else. I play out the top again. I'm looking to get a look with it and then flip it to discard whatever the worst card is on top of my deck here. They play on a Night Veil Spectre, which is disconcerting. I go ahead and Impulse here. Grab the Shimmer of Possibilities. I'm trying to set up a game win on the following turn. I go ahead and discard Shimmer of Possibilities. I drew into a tutor for my deck. Go ahead and cast out top. Look, don't care about any of it. Actually, I'm sorry. I play out top because I actually don't want to try to go for it quite yet. I'm a little bit low on mana resources. I play out top so I can put top on top of my deck and allow them to steal it with Night Veil Spectre as opposed to the best card I may get. They play out top and take a look. I could get punished there by that line, but I knew I had Fabricate on top of my deck, and I wanted to be able to Fabricate for a piece of the combo. Which, here, Black Lotus. Convert the Dimir Infiltrator into Infernal Tutor, which is going to find me, I believe... Did I cast Yawgmoth's? I just use Yawgmoth's Will. I have enough Storm Count with Yawgmoth's Will. So, despite, getting Wastelanded, having a Deathrite Shaman, and having a Liliana, used against us, we managed to get there, which is pretty cool. So, we're playing against like a rock deck, which typically is going to be a pretty decent matchup for us, depending on how much like discard they're playing. But if they're as deep as Doomfall, and actually Night Veil Spectre too, like they have a lot of hate pieces against like the combo style decks, like the one I'm running right now. Because if Night Veil Spectre like straight up exiles my Tendrils, I lose the game. If it exiles Lotus, I'm hampered significantly from winning the game. And obviously having Liliana, cast against you, on turn, what was that? It was actually on curve. It was turn 3. I think they Doomfall then Wastelanded on turn 2. Well, they could have gotten Liliana down. It's pretty savage. So, managed to pull this one out. It's turn 8 win, but it was through significant disruption. So, this game right here, I wouldn't say like per se the matchup, but this game at least kind of goes to show like some of the hatred and some of the disruption this deck can just fight through. Why I think it's a very strong deck. Even without Demonic Tutor in the point spread, I think it's one of the top decks. I don't know if it's like the best, but I think it's tier 1 very easily. I think you could bring it to a tournament and do well with it. Just you see this, and like I've played it countless times against like Eidolons, Thalias, Blood Moons. It's just it generally tends to get the job done. So anyways, guys, quick pause. Be back for the next game in this match. All right, guys, we're back. This hand is not exciting, but it's keepable. It's got a lot of mana, and it's got access to a tutor. So I get Thoughtseized, go figure. I mean, they're playing a very disruptive deck. I get rid of the Thoughtseize and keep the Dark Petition since it's an actual tutor as opposed to the the Shred Memory, which is kind of not. I find a land, which is exactly what I need to have happen here. I just go ahead and silence them here. They can play a land and pass it if they want. I think that may have been a little premature. I don't know. I probably should have waited on that silence to try to anticipate EOT. I do go ahead and shred here and find Cabal Ritual. They get rid of my Cabal Ritual. They get a Nihil Spellbomb, which is annoying because it's... So like our opponent has played a lot of very good cards against this deck. So they played Thoughtseize, Inquisition, and the Nihil Spellbomb. I think this is where my OP kind of makes a mistake. I don't like this play. I think if you just leave up Nile Spellbomb and force me to react to it, actually no, never mind. They're fine. They're fine here. I like this play actually. Well, sort of. Like I like what I like doing for this play is I actually don't like popping this thing unless you really need to get a threat down that costs 5 mana next turn. And I forget if they had to or not. The one thing that's dubious, like, so they actually know my hand, so I guess I'm misspeaking. Like, I have Chain of Vapor, so I'm going to Chain of Vapor the Nile Spellbomb the turn before I intend on going off. So they're going to get rid of all this crap, but, like, none of it's really essential. Like, some of it's nice. Like, Cabal Ritual is nice to have access to, but it's not necessary. So, if they didn't know I had Chain of Vapor, if you're playing from the opposite end and you have a Nile Spellbomb or an effect like this, don't burn it off. Like, save it. They burned it off because I think they made a smart play here. I think they knew they had to pressure next turn. If they know they're tapping out, it makes sense to eat up the cards that are already in there. So they take away Threshold, which Threshold is really not relevant anymore because of Cabal Ritual. But they can at least diminish resources in case I go to a Yawgmoth's Will turn. But, you know, and throw out what I said initially, throw it out the window. They played fine here. Like, I think popping it makes sense because they probably know I'm going to Chain of Vapor on their EOT and force them to pop it anyways, and they may not be able to get value then because they're going to be playing a 5-mana threat. I don't remember if they play a 5-mana threat or not, though. So they draw their card off of this and exile my yard. Cycle a Baron of Moroth, play on a Mox, cast Doomfall. Now, this is a play that I don't care for. So this is the first one I don't really care for. They get the Dark Petition. Well, here's the thing, right? Like, I don't care for it, but it's not per se wrong. It just depends on their hand. I like this play more if they're going to apply pressure on the same turn. If they're not going to apply pressure this turn, I like taking Diabolic Revelation. Now, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about when I called Diabolic Revelation and not Dark Petition, Behold the Beyond. These cards seem like big donkey commander cards, and they kind of are. But if I can resolve one of them, which this deck makes mana, you know, it makes tons of mana. If I can resolve one of them for 3, I will win the game. Like, I will win the game. Like, it's pretty much foregone. Like, it's not a hard line. I just win. Staking Dark Petition, like, makes sense if you want to try to bide time. Because if I do get to... Actually, I can just cast Dark Petition now. If I cast Dark Petition for no value, no mana, no spell mastery, off of the Rite of Flame, then I can find more mana. I can find just, like, Black Lotus, which will set up the Diabolic Revelation faster. So it makes sense to me to do this line if you were going to apply pressure, like play like a Lotleth Troll or something like that out of your deck. But when I'm not under pressure, like I kind of like taking the Diabolic Revelation because it has the most high up, or has the highest potential. So I find a Black Lotus on top because I'm a sack. You know, I play out my tap land, leave the Lotus on top of my deck. They actually tap out this turn for a Karn. For some reason, they don't want to kill my lands. I don't know why. I give them the non-Assassin's Trophy cards. I don't want my deck shuffled. I give them Josu Vess. Just a threat. Play out the Rite of Flame. Cast out the Lotus. One of the things is when you actually use Lotus to cast these big tutors, it actually does tend to drop the utility of these big tutors. Because you are going to need more startup mana on the backside of it. Here, it's pretty simple still. I just find Dark Ritual as opposed to Lotus. I'm going to use the Dark Ritual to make black mana. The game may freeze at this point. Yeah, nothing in my hand costs 1. So, I'm going to talk through the line. The replay is broken because when you tutor a bunch on replays, they tend to break. What it appears the game is trying to do is cast my Infernal Tutor, which happened a couple plays after this. I'm in Storm Count 3. I cast a Dark Ritual out to make 3 black mana, play out a Lion's Eye Diamond, put an Infernal Tutor on the stack, sacking Lion's Eye Diamond to go to 0 cards, with 4 black mana floating. At this point in time, I find Ill-Gotten Gains. The Storm Count at that point is 6. Cast Ill-Gotten Gains to go up to Storm Count 7, get back Black Lotus, Infernal Tutor, and Lion's Eye Diamond. At that point, play out Lion's Eye Diamond, Black Lotus, cast then Dark Ritual. I'm sorry, then not Dark Ritual. That's at Storm Count 10, I want to say, once you have all that out. You do the same sequence where you sack Black Lotus to make the mana for Infernal Tutor, put Infernal Tutor on a stack, sack the Lion's Eye Diamond, Black Lotus always first, Lion's Eye Diamond second. And then end up finding Yawgmoth's Will. At this point in time, I have exactly 4 mana remaining. After casting Yawgmoth's Will,
Yawgmoth's Will to get back Black Lotus, Dark Ritual, and Lion's Eye Diamond, sacking all those. Infernal Tutor to get the Tendrils and win the game with Storm count 13 or 14 here. But more than enough. So this game was kind of more hard mode. I don't know habitually how often our opponent's deck is going to be this disruptive, but their draws certainly were very disruptive. We got hand attacked 3 times this game. Played against Denial Spellbomb. Game 1 played against habitual hand attack from Liliana the Veil. Got wastelanded off one of our mana accelerants, and also got Deathrite Shaman and hand attacked, like point hand attack with Doomfall. So, what it came down to is that, we were still able to get through it. Also kind of ties into like one of the common like aphorisms, and really it's a truism about the format. Disruption without pressure is wasted time. If you're playing against a deck that is designed to win games of Magic very well, you're not going to disrupt them so hard without a clock that they're not going to be able to find a way to win. Now, that said, I mean, yes, like if they Doomfall and I have Tendrils in hand and they exile the Tendrils, like they just win the game. The chance of me just having the Tendrils in hand, because I'm not going to generally keep ranges with Tendrils in the hand, is pretty low. But as you kind of see in these 2 games right here, like I don't think my opponent played poorly. I think in general, like if they know the threat density of their deck, like even keeping a threat dense hand against Storm is not the worst, especially if you're like a more grindy deck. But what it came down to is like it's these cards, Thoughtseize, Inquisition of Kozilek, Doomfall, even counter spells are kind of just a blanket, right? Like you need to have a way to win the game proactively against Storm as well, is having these. So I don't know what their hand was, and I'm not saying they played poorly. I think they seem to have played it pretty well. But you gotta apply clock. So it's also why I like the Rock, even though like they can have some pretty grindy and powerful card advantage discard effects. I think tends to struggle with this matchup because they can't interact with the stack and they don't apply a ton of pressure really fast, and a lot of their cards tend to be value oriented, as opposed to good independent threats. So, anyways, that was this match, guys. I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. Unfortunately, I had to reinstall Moto recently, so I don't have a ton more replays, but I played quite a bit with this deck, with varieties of this deck, and I enjoy it quite a bit, and I wanted to hopefully share some of my own, insights from bumbling through learning how to play the deck, and, I would not say master it, but I'm at least competent at playing the Storm deck, and it's a deck that a lot of people I think say is uniquely challenging and difficult. It's really not. Like there's this mystique around it, because I don't think you tend to see it online as much, that it's a challenging deck to play. It's really not. It's a deck that requires practice, because a lot of the lines with practice become very clear, and really enables your approach to it to be very solid in most cases. Now, like I think where you get into the more interesting cases is in games like this, or in games where like you're under so much pressure that you just have to go for it and take like the lower EV, or the highest EV plays, which are going to tend to be more variance driven. Like you may like have to cast a Tainted Pact, and like if you hit the wrong card, like you just lose. Which you would not do that under normal circumstances, but if you're just going to die the next turn, you do it. So yeah, a lot of play to the deck, but again, like the standard lines and like just being able to play this deck competently is not that difficult. And being able to beat it and disrupt it, I think, also kind of revolves around understanding how it does function as well. Because there are certain play patterns, none that I saw specifically in this set of games that I had here, where folks will play in a certain way against these style of decks where they just they don't do it in a way where it's like it's really pressuring me as the Storm pilot. And not as an example like for Neesinks, I think they played this given what they had and maybe based on how their deck's built the best they could. But I've definitely played against pilots that will just hand attack the crap out of you on turn 1 and 2 as opposed to deploying threats. Deploy your threats first. Like if I have the turn 1 kill, like that stinks. Like it stinks and you're gonna lose to it. But like the chances of me having the turn 1 kill are very low. Typically, I'm gonna have to tutor twice, and if you hand attack me after you've applied played 1-drop or a 2-drop creature and are hitting me, like if you play it then after I've tutored, like it's gonna be so much more savage. I'm gonna be like, all right, well now my range of options are very limited. or I've limited my options because I've already used my tutors, and now the hand attack is kind of just blowing apart my hand, and I'm back into top deck mode, unless I have a very redundant hand. So, yeah, I think you've heard other pilots probably say, like, save your hand attack, don't hand attack turn 1. I mean, it's not to say, like, don't hand attack turn 1 if, like, it's going to, if not hand attacking turn 1 is going to delay your hand attack until turn 4, because I'm trying to win by then. But if it's going to delay it to turn 2 or turn 3, like, do it. Apply the pressure first and then do that, because, yeah, the best way to kill this deck is to just kill it, right? And because of the fact that it's going to have to tutor a bunch, to set up for a turn 4 kill, if you hand attack on turn 3, you can generally tend to make it very difficult for the deck to win by turn 4. And then the pressure that you've been applying, since turn 1, turn 2, is going to have a snowballing effect where it takes me 2 to 3 more turns to find the cards I need to actually try to go off again, and by that point I could just be dead. So yeah, always apply pressure first. It's the best way to beat this deck. Yeah. Anyways, that said, it's still a resilient deck. So still, sometimes even following that model that I'm talking about of like how you use your hand attack or how you use your disruption, like it's just not going to work out. Like because the deck again is very resilient and can just fight through a ton of stuff, and sometimes it'll just have it. So there's that. And that's also why it's a top tier deck, right? Like it's really good. Anyways, I'm glad I got to kind of explore this deck with you guys, and hopefully my own musings on it have helped you understand the deck better. If it's a deck you're interested in picking up, it's a very good deck. I think my build, like I said, has a little bit of wiggle room in it to kind of improve. I do think that you could take out I'm trying to remember the card's name, Peer Through Depths and Shimmer of Possibility, and put it in Ransack the Lab and Strategic Planning. They're probably just better for the deck, especially because it's all sorcery speed. I mean, like Peer Through Depths is instant speed, so maybe not. I really like that Look at 5. The Look at 5 is really big, but not finding a land is also kind of rough. Sometimes you just need one. But anyways, guys, that is my Build a Storm. These are some games with it. Very powerful deck, very cool deck. But again, like there's not a lot of mystery to it. Like if you sit down and play with it, study it, and practice against it, like it's not that difficult to beat if you have the right disruption and you know the right times. The right times to use it is really the biggest part. Folks generally have the right tools in their decks. They think that they need to do it early and often, and it tends to be that tends to be wrong. It tends to be statistically wrong. Sometimes it's right. Sometimes you just open up on a Black Lotus LED Infernal Tutor draw and like they hand attack you on turn 1 and you just it doesn't work. It works out for them, but like that's the exception to the rule. Typically speaking, you have to set up for it. So, anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed and take care now.